following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. Happy New Year! This is the first show of 2026, and we're going to start off with something super helpful, I hope. We're going to be looking at resentment, including all the gaslighting, minimizing, and general BS that's online about it. If you found yourself ironically resenting online advice about resentment, it's not just you. Resentment is a response to feeling mistreated, wronged, or treated unfairly, which are really three different ways of saying the same thing, but different people prefer different terms, so I'm trying to cover multiple bases. You can feel resentment towards a person, a situation, even just a string of bad luck. And resentment feels like some combination of anger, bitterness, disgust, disappointment, even a sense of moral wrongness. It's impossible to avoid feeling resentment sometime, and trying to deny it because you think, oh, this isn't a good feeling, can lead to shame and a loss of self-esteem. Resentment is deeply linked to control in that we tend to feel resentment when we feel like we don't have enough control over our lives somehow. It results when we feel taken advantage of, rejected, dismissed, or ignored. If we tend to feel inadequate, unappreciated, or unheard, we're more prone to feeling resentment. Note that none of these descriptions are objective reality. It's about how someone feels. Resentment is tied to our expectations of people and situations. If those expectations aren't realistic, well, that's breeding ground for resentment. And unrealistically negative expectations are just as bad, if not worse, than unrealistically positive ones. Think about it. We all know that person who starts running themselves down the minute they're romantically interested in someone. They start saying all the reasons why they don't have a chance with that person. Then you start hearing about how that person doesn't appreciate what they have to offer. It may even get to a declaration that the entire gender of that person doesn't appreciate them or people like them. And that's the problem with resentment. It can get out of control and lead you to tell yourself awful stories that just aren't true. Resentment is also tied to unmet emotional needs and what that does to relationships. If you don't feel like other people are putting in as much as you are, well, that's going to breed resentment. Assessing how much effort various people are putting in, though, is highly subjective, and you really have to watch the assumptions there. The people who tell themselves that no one cares, no one's interested, and no one ever will are the people who tend to neglect the needs of other people around them the most. When someone is swallowed up in misery, it's hard for them to read the room. But even for those people, there's usually a tiny kernel of truth to their complaints. They just often take it out on the wrong people because the people or situations that are really causing the resentment make them feel small, powerless, and rejected. And humans are wired to find those feelings and feeling those things untenable. Because resentment is a complex blend of emotions, and because it's based on the stories we tell ourselves about events, and therefore it's not objective, it's often difficult to figure out the precise cause or source of that feeling of resentment. Because of this, suggestions or demands to let it go, or questions like, when are you going to let that go, tend to, ironically, create more resentment, not less. And I find that this is a generality, but I'm saying it to be helpful. People who don't see the problem with saying, oh, just let it go, or when are you going to let that go, Well, they tend to talk to themselves that way. And they end up holding pretty massive grudges that pop up directed at people who didn't actually cause the valid core pain at the root of that resentment and grudges. People who have listened to this show for a while know that I didn't have the best childhood. It makes certain elements of navigating other people challenging because I just don't make the same assumptions about other people as people who, grew up with actual nurturing. Working through the resentment of the fact that I never had a chance to be normal. You can hear the air quotes normal. That was a real process. And what I discovered was at the core of this stuff, there was something of what I call a dyad of misery. A dyad is something that contains two closely connected parts. Now, my dyad was, on the one hand, I had to accept that my biological father was both profoundly mentally ill and not a terribly great person on top of that. And 95% of the other adults that I encountered were too frightened of him to look after me when I was a kid. On the other end of that dyad is the reality that I am weird. And yes, that's rooted in childhood. And I just got really sick of having my current day concerns dismissed as nothing more than products of my horrible upbringing. And some days it seems impossible to really form deep connections with people because the minute they find out about my personal history, they assume that every time I get upset, it's rooted in some sort of trauma and therefore isn't their problem. They shouldn't have to change anything. Blah! See? Diet of misery. It can get worse sometimes. Some people, they throw out stereotypes about people with PTSD right in my face, assuming that if I'm having a bad reaction to something, I'm being cruel and aggressive because there's something inherently wrong with me, but also that I'm totally aware of what I'm doing and I'm doing it on purpose. Of course, absolutely nothing they did or are doing is contributing to any of this because their therapist says that they have the right to set boundaries. Of course, often the people who say that haven't seen that therapist in months, possibly years. This is the reality of letting people know you have a diagnosis like PTSD. It's a peach. I walked around with this dyad of misery and the resentment that ensued for a good decade. And it still creeps back in sometimes. I throw in a little comical, rah, in that, right? It still creeps back in. I'm a human being and I have to stop and work through it, right? What I realized is that at the core of that resentment that kept creeping back on in, there was a belief that it made sense that no one really wants to deal with me on more than a surface level because I'm weird and not even my own parents could stand me for long. And that was the part I had to work on more than anything. We all have our fears. We all have our insecurities. But, that was really the tough part. Everything else was just a matter of telling people who are out of line to shove it when I could, and validating myself when there are reasons to not tell people to shove it sometimes. I also learned to walk away. And if you're someone plagued by resentment, I recommend you learn to walk away. Really walk away, mentally, emotionally, as well as physically. And it's the learning part that's the challenge, right? Because so much of the online advice on resentment is of the kind, learn to let it go in some way, shape, or form. Letting things go is a result of process, not a process in itself. So this show, I'm going to break down what makes resentment so tricky, how to work through it. And if you do that work, the letting go will happen when you actually feel better, as opposed to the kind of letting go that so many people demand, which is just a suppression of emotions that leads to, more resentment. Top 10 phrase, ignoring negatives isn't being positive. So we'll go to break, and when we come back, I'll deal more with what I realized in my own story. Resentment tends to have an element of feeling bad about yourself as much as, if not more so, feeling bad about other people. Do you have a story you think would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? NotTherapyShow.com is the website. Liana at NotTherapyShow.com is my email. At NotTherapyShow on social media. Where we go wrong with resentment continues when we come back on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back at It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We are still talking about resentment and why looking up online advice about resentment tends to make you resent the internet. Most articles about resentment remind me of why I became a peer counselor instead of a licensed therapist, because a therapist cannot make suggestions like I do based on their own experience. They have to maintain professional distance, and they absolutely cannot lead the client because of the imbalance of power in a client-therapist relationship. Therapists, including the ones who write articles, will suggest you deal with resentment with vagaries like, understand its roots. All right. Simple enough, yet super not easy. Accept your feelings. Okay, how? That's the part that trips a lot of people up. What does it mean to accept? Set boundaries. Real talk, a lot of therapists don't even know how to properly do this, even though they lecture people about it all day. Real talk. Practice forgiveness. Yeah, great. Forgiveness is another one of those things I found as a byproduct or end result of doing other work on and with yourself. Trying to take a direct run at forgiveness, just make yourself forgive, that tends to result in more resentment, not less, because, well, it's a forced artificial process. Communicate needs. Of course, this completely skips over the fact that resentment can sometimes be a sign of an unmet need that you didn't know you had. And society is chronically telling you that having needs, especially of the kind that you can't even admit you have, is bad and selfish. That's why you can't admit you have them, right? Right. Focus on what you can control. Okay, not bad in practice. I'm big on control what you can control. But what if it feels like you can't control anything about a given circumstance? Practice self-compassion. Again, great in theory. I'm big on self-compassion. How does that apply in situations that make you feel like utter garbage? Compassionate garbage. Yeah. Building healthier coping mechanisms. They make it sound so easy, don't they? You'll also find articles that do things like suggest you identify and allow yourself to feel emotions underlying the anger and resentment before suggesting being present with your anger and resentment. And putting the underlying cart before the overlying horse low-key sends the message that the angry part isn't really real and is somehow bad. Why wouldn't these articles written by experts list feeling the top layer emotion first, then explore whether there's anything underneath it? Well, because they're rushing to get it out in between the very important things that their very important lives in their very important job have. And then there's my favorite non-favorite bit. This is my favorite non-favorite bit of advice. Identify how you may have contributed to the situation. Jumping to that bit, you do have to get there eventually, but jumping to that bit while the resentment is still raging is only going to breed more resentment. Because, especially if somebody has a tendency towards self-blame, if somebody already feels like the situation is unfair, oh, what'd you do is a first step? No, that's not going to work. It's going to backfire. This is the stuff that makes me tear my hair out. Because I had to learn all this stuff the hard way. I had to run up the down escalator in therapy and learn none of these pieces of advice are wrong. They are often presented in the wrong order. They're also highly abstract, and I do what I do on the show and then with my, one-on-one clients, with my groups, with my workshops. I try to cut down on the years people spend fumbling around in therapy, even if they're in therapy. Therapy's good. Trying to find these answers without more guidance than these abstractions that therapists cannot give them. I can't get those 5 to 10 years of my life back when I was spent stumbling around, going in circles. But I can pay forward this help so other people can get where I got quicker. Remember I said that the core of resentment is a dyad, two deeply connected things? Now think of it like those two connected things start spinning around each other in a spiral, kind of like a strand of DNA. The DNA of your resentment is the node that is about the external world, locked in a death spiral with that node in your self-concept that you can't stand or makes you feel weak and powerless. The hard part, the part that all this vague advice ignores, is it's really difficult and painful to look at something within you that makes you feel weak and powerless when you're already feeling weak and powerless. That is impossibly painful. And so we get, that dyad spinning around, spiraling into a strand of DNA. It looks something like this. Feel bad. Resent. Feel worse. Resent feeling worse. Feel worse and frustrated because it keeps getting worse. Resent that it keeps getting worse and no one is helping. Why is no one helping? Why does no one care? Meltdown, self-loathing, shame. Repeat, right? That's the real talk about resentment spirals. And they are a tangled mess. The first step to untangling the mess is separating what you know about the situation or person from what you suspect about the situation or person. So column 1, no. Column 2, respect, right? For instance, you know what your friend said hurt your feelings. You suspect or fear that she did it on purpose to hurt you. But you don't know that. And if she did, all the more reason to not do the work of that manipulative nonsense for her. Now that we've stepped out of the resentment into the relative stability of spite, do what works, right? And therefore, we've stepped a bit away from the core of insecurity or self-hatred that's one half of the resentment dyad. Now we can examine our assumptions, fears, and suspicions further. Like so. Do you really believe that your friend hurt you on purpose? Is that inner character? Does that seem like her? Is it possible you're projecting or deflecting something because there's something you need to work on that hurts that bad? Are you putting some unfair expectations on your friend that she should read your mind, know more than she does? What part of you wants to think your friend hurt you on purpose? Why? What are you trying to control here? Now, some people listening to that may have felt like their brain was screaming at them, and I feel you. I had that brain scream at some point that, like that. I won't do it on the radio, what it really sounds like, right? That process that I just did is really hard for a lot of people. It's impossible for some, especially when you're dealing with a personality disorder. Personality disorders have to do with, a sense of self so unstable that they go, falsely accusing someone is bad. Even in my head, even if I didn't say anything, that's a bad thing. Not just something people do sometimes, which is why it's best to not speak or act on those thoughts right away, but it's a bad thing. And if you can't separate did a bad thing from am a bad person, then any mistake you make is going to go into I'm a bad person territory. And that is so painful and scary that many people instinctively deflect and project that attack on themselves that they did themselves, and they convince themselves, no, another person is attacking me. Like my friend who isn't mean is suddenly all of a sudden being mean because I feel. This is where the self-compassion work comes in. And I'm kind of rough on self-compassion. I grew up at Jane Finch. I come by it honestly. What I mean is top 10 phrase, perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect, right? Stop being compassionate towards perfection. If you think you need to be perfect to be accepted, you're never going to feel accepted because perfect is a lie. And so you're going to feel a lot of resentment because all you're doing is failing to meet your own expectation. This need to be perfect, or at least make no mistakes, tends to silence us in social situations when it's better for everyone if we'd actually said something. Because, in truth, I actually know people who do that hurtful, catty statements. And what I've determined just by observing is it's a form of doublethink, right? They do it, definitely people they don't like, and there's a certain amount of consciousness of that. But it becomes so habitual for them that sometimes they can't turn it off when they're frustrated with somebody they do like, right? Cue hurtful, catty statement against someone who, probably didn't deserve it. Now, that is partially out of mimicry. There is a degree of deliberateness in that they chose to act on that feeling. But they're so far gone in the habit of being catty and nasty that they can't examine their own behavior as soon as they feel hurt. Now, I accept that I don't trust these people. I also accept that if I'm around them, they're going to get under my skin from time to time. And I don't have to think they're overall bad people to know that I have to limit contact. And I'm going to go easy on myself and not blame myself when comments designed to get under my skin get under my skin. That's their job. Do we hate on a screwdriver for being a screwdriver? Nope. Even when it's vodka and orange juice, right? But I have a rule with people like this that I suspect might actually have some deliberateness to the cattiness. I give them one chance to prove me wrong. One. Both out of a sense of fairness and because the resentment that staying silent breeds isn't worth it. It's not worth the guesswork. And I'll tell you how that plays out after our second break. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com is my email. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapyshow is social media. How to avoid resentment before it starts after the break on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. I still have an unusual amount of energy because I'm back from 2 weeks off. Like, woohoo, I feel great. Yeah, we're still talking about resentment. And before the break, I talked about how I have a rule when dealing with people I'm starting to resent because I'm starting to think they're digs or at least partially deliberate, right? And I said I give them one chance to prove me wrong and show that their behavior is actually an innocent mistake. Now, it's a radical idea. This is a radical move, right? Get ready. Hold on to your seat. If you don't have a seat, hold on to your own seat. Maybe not in public. Okay, ready? I tell them, radical act. I tell them what they're doing is bothering me. I tell them why. And I ask them to please stop doing it, offering them a better alternative if I can think of one. I know, right? That is crazy. Being assertive. What? But it's good crazy. It makes it pretty clear for my own self who is worth my time and who just isn't. Now, does this rule blow up in my face? All the time, sirs and madams and everybody else, okay? People can be colossally disappointing, manipulative backstabbers. And the great thing is that as soon as I do this, if it blows up, now it's clear what they're doing. Because someone who is an adult and they meant no harm, they just say, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know. Let's work this out." I have felt so much less resentment since I started laying my cards on the table like this, and I waste much less time on people who aren't worth it. Now, real talk again. This is a real talk episode. I make enemies. Oh, yeah. Doing this? Woo, yeah. But it's better to make little enemies earlier in a relationship that forget about you fairly quickly than big enemies who thought I was their friend, who become stalkers and lie constantly about me online, which is what used to happen because I was so hesitant to set boundaries because I was afraid of exactly the outcome I was helping to create by delaying, what could be an inevitable conflict. Yes, this is me taking responsibility for my part in the bad blood. I let it go on too soon. Right? Ooh, do the stalkers resent me for saying this in public? I get nasty grams telling me I deserve the Charlie Kirk treatment for saying stuff like this. But, that's some, that is resentment. Peak choice burning resentment. And you know what? Better they feel it than me. That resentment, that's eating up their already blackened insides. Not mine. My soul is juicy. Never mind. What was that? I don't know. Okay. That's the thing about resentment, right? When you just can't let go. When the only thing connecting yourself to another person is hate, it's probably better to find a way to break that toxic connection, right? Those people are in my past, mostly, because I am so in their present that they remind me I'm living rent-free in their heads every time they send bile at me across the internet. And some of you might be thinking, what'd you do? Well, in some cases, these are people that I have not had direct contact with in 12 to 13 years. I didn't do anything worth that at this point. They just can't disconnect the resentment dyad of misery. Because disconnecting the resentment dyad, separating those two things, breaking the connection, means addressing the negative emotion inside you that's keeping you stuck and nurturing yourself through it. Now, if someone can help you with this, great. This is what I do for people all the time. But if it's an old hurt, like if this is something you've been struggling with, for a while, the more likely reception you're going to get is, when are you going to let that go? Right? We talked about that already. Not great reality we have to accept. So how do we do our own work? First off, that person hurt you. That person hurt me. We've all been hurt at some point. That person, you ended up frightened, right? They did something that frightened you. We've all been frightened. That person blamed you for things that weren't true. They lied about you. It may have been deliberate, or it may have been an accident at first, but then they really badly handled finding out that you were hurt, frightened, or you felt unfairly blamed. Usually because they themselves are really bad at handling when they've made a mistake, like I talked about before. It's amazing how many people try to bully their way out of a blunder. It is so irrational and so completely human because of the way panic brain chemicals kick in that freeze, fight, fawn, or flight response. That person right there who tried to bully their way out of a blunder, That person made the mistake I'm helping you avoid making right now. They acted before they really knew what they were feeling. They've internalized the belief that fear, sadness, disappointment, and hurt are weaknesses instead of just feedback. So instead of being honest with themselves about how they were feeling, how they are feeling, they retaliate. How dare you make them feel those weak things, right? It's easier to practice feeling. Yes, practice feeling your feelings. It is a thing. Things like fear, sadness, disappointment, hurt, even happiness. It's easier to practice these things in relatively safe environments. My current practice, if anyone's interested, is the video game Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. I could hear people rolling their eyes because I said Warhammer 40k. But no, hear me out, okay? The stories in Warhammer 40k of powerful people who started off with the best of intentions, only to get literally warped by the consequences of power combined with desperation. You know, absorbing this stuff, participating in these stories, it's really good mental health practice as long as you don't break the bank on the figures affectionately known as plastic crack. Anyway, whatever way you can take time to let yourself feel emotions that are harder for you. It doesn't have to be Warhammer 40k. It probably won't be, okay? But, okay, whatever lets you practice feeling things that are hard to feel without having to do anything about it, right? Do that. It's good practice. This includes anger. It is possible to be angry without losing control. This includes happiness sometimes. People feel happy, people feel hopeful, and they immediately get scared. So start telling yourself maybe even fictional stories. Warhammer 40k ain't great for hope, but, hey, what is a hopeful story? How can you practice by engaging with that without immediately kicking in that fear response that you're being stupid? Hope isn't stupid, but sometimes it takes some time to realize that. This all helps you get to that internal part of the resentment dyad of misery. The internal part is within your control, possibly indirectly. Okay? First step, make sure you tell yourself that it's okay to feel these things, including the resentment. This is a thing every article I read researching this show skipped over. It's never, look, you're feeling resentment. It's okay. We all feel it. It's like, what do you do to get by it? No, first step. I'm feeling it. It's a thing. It's okay. Just thinking that it's okay to feel this, you immediately feel calmer. I'm feeling calmer right now, and I'm not even feeling that right now. Some things that the negative feelings, like the resentment and the anger and the fear, some things that those make you want to do are not okay. But the feeling? No, man, it's good. It's good. Feelings are feedback, right? And it's gonna cut down on the resentment a lot if you take the time and care to validate your own damn feelings. If you don't learn to validate your own damn feelings, no amount of others validating you is really going to land in your soul. My juicy soul. I don't know where that came from. Joking aside, you'll always find some way to dismiss the validation attempts of the people around you if you cannot self-validate. It won't stick. That's a happy dyad. It must both be within you and the other person. Self-validation, the concept of self-validation, is a simple thing. It's okay. It is real. It's okay. But simple? It don't mean easy. Recently, I had to do one of the hardest things for me in a complicated social situation, a tense social situation. One of the hardest things for me to do in a complicated, anxiety-driven social situation is nothing. Nothing. I'm a fixer, right? I am. I have to watch that. A friend had confided in me that another friend had done something that hurt their feelings, that I know that second friend absolutely did not intend to be hurtful. I know this person well enough to know that they did not mean to. I thought that the whole thing could be solved like today, that day, if they just talked. But friend one didn't want to do that. That friend one, just wanted to see how things went the next social gathering. Now, fortunately, I'm going to jump to the end. Spoiler, it went fine, but wow, waiting for it was hard. And what helped me through the hard was to validate that it was hard. I'm not great with secrets because I spent too many years ashamed of the secrets of what was going on at home. And I felt a bit resentful in the recent past, for being in a situation where I had to relive that shame from the past. And that's when I hit reset. And I'll tell you how I did it after the break. Yes, we're going there. Questions, comments, any feedback. Liana at nottherapyshow.com, nottherapyshow.com, at nottherapyshow on social media. Resentment, how I stopped it myself in a specific example circumstances that really happened after the break. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in Instant Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about resentment. And before the break, I told you I'd talk about how I hit reset on resentment that was starting to form in me about something I realized, whoa, wait a minute, hit the brake. It stemmed from two friends not being on the same page and not handling it in the way that I would have handled it, heaven forbid, and the irrational feeling that I was being forced to keep a secret that felt wrong. Now, I'm kind of mocking myself because I checked myself then, right? I wasn't being forced by anyone. I was choosing. I could have said something. I didn't think that was the best decision, and it wasn't my place. Top 10 phrase, be the hero of your own story and not anyone else's. My first friend, who wanted to wait and see about a hurt feeling instead of having the difficult conversation, had every right to take that approach. It wasn't my battle to fight, and there was nothing broken yet, so it wasn't my place to fix it. My anxiety about it was my problem, not my friend's. I gave my friend the opportunity to do it their way, and it worked out. Turns out there was no awkward conversation necessary, and that friend handled it in the way they wanted, not the way I wanted. And that's being a friend, right? Giving my friend that. It was the adult, respectful thing to do, and something you can't do if you freak out the moment you feel anxiety. Controlling what you can control in the face of resentment is, like I said, often an internal process, in that all you can control is the story you tell yourself about your circumstances. It's a great place to start either way. The story I told myself over those days of waiting and doing nothing and having childhood trauma flashbacks was, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. See, I use my own top 10 phrases. I wasn't even there when the hurt occurred between my friends. It wasn't my problem. So if I'd gotten involved prematurely, that was likely gonna be a mistake. Yeah, I was stressed. Not only is there the childhood stuff, I have really bad experiences with people keeping things from me. And, if they just told me at the time, it could have been solved. Instead, they held on to it, and then it was like they weaponized it for maximum pain. But this wasn't that. I had to get myself out of it. And instead of resenting the stress that work caused, and resenting my friend because my friend was, the subject of the narrative of the stress, I realized that the root cause of the stress was in fact my own bad past experiences. And because of those own bad past experiences, I was feeling overly protective of the second friend, and it was premature. I couldn't do anything about the external part, the external circumstances that were part of the forming resentment dyad. I could disconnect the internal part and decide to just trust my blinking friends instead. And with that choice, resentment went bye-bye. There's a lot of power in making those choices. I don't have to resent anything because I'm in the driver's seat of my own juicy soul Corvette. Sometimes I say something so stupid, it's just delightful, right? Now, this circumstance I'm giving you was deliberately an easy, small baby just forming tadpole resentment, right? But the core of the process applies to everything. My friend, because of my choices, I allowed them to get past their negative feelings because I supported them in regaining their sense of control. It was their story. They were the hero in it instead of acting like I knew better. This is what it means to be a peer counselor, right? It's my job not to put myself artificially above others. And I had to check that in myself in social situations. Seeing people as equals is pretty great. And again, that's simple, but it's not easy. It involves developing your own self-concept and self-esteem, but also practicing humility and knowing when something is not your damn business, so stay the heck out of it. Easier to say, but I told about it, now it's my business. No, you're not. If you read the business section of a news website, does NVIDIA become your business? No, it doesn't. You're just reading about it. Stay the heck out of it. Self-esteem and humility are the anti-resentment dyad. See what I did here? We got the good DNA with the bad DNA, right? Self-esteem and humility connected together deeply. That's the way to overcome resentment, not just let it go, because your sources in any given situation of self-esteem, your source of humility, that can take some time to discover. That's the work. But that's the work that, first of all, is understandable. You can get your mind around that, right? How do you feel better when someone's, started something that made you feel worse? And how do you not kind of, throw your ego into it because you're reacting to what you think it means, not the facts you know? Now, I'm not trying to sugarcoat life, right? I'm not trying to say that every situation is going to have this rosy outcome like me and my friends did. We're friends for a reason, right? It's more a question of really, like I said, using that one weird trick I do. Actually, tell someone what's bothering you, why, and, how to do it better. And if it blows up, well, now you've got data. Now you've got an answer. And it's not your fault that something blowed up. You gave them a chance. And that's all you can really give somebody. You can make the opportunities. It's that dyad again, right? Both people have to be connected for it to work out. If some person chooses to sever that connection instead of just going, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know, right? You can't do anything about that. That's beyond your control. You can do things on an above board way that you can stand by, that no matter what the outcome, you can feel sad. You can feel frightened at the very big response you got, right? You can feel confused. You can feel hurt. You can feel disappointed. But what you're not feeling is blame and shame. And if you keep that out of the equation and, practice that self-esteem of, I can defend how I handled it. Was it perfect? No. Be humble. But don't run yourself down. Humility isn't, beating yourself up. It's the opposite of that. It's that flip side. Like I said, the anti-resentment dyad. It's that part of you that recognizes you're good enough and you do not have to control every single external force. Everything will not fall apart in everything about your life because of one mistake. If it does in one facet of your life, there are others you can rebuild. How? Well, that's a story for another time. Questions, comments, any feedback whatsoever, suggestions for another topic on the show, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapy on social media. We've got a lot of standalone content on Instagram and TikTok. Have a happy 2026. It's gotten off to something of a bad, crazy start in terms of global geopolitics. I deliberately didn't touch on that because sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. I do know a lot of people who are feeling a lot of resentment towards the system and our various politicians right now. And it's a tricky one because, this stuff can make you feel very small and insignificant. And there's not much that any of us can do about it except, watch that internal part of the dyad, right? Like, don't blame yourself. If you were fooled, you were fooled. If you weren't fooled, then this is exactly what you expected. Mazel tov, but I think everybody right now, or the vast majority of people, are going, no, I didn't sign up for this. Nobody I know who voted for these guys signed up for this. It's just bad crazy. And all you can do is do the best for yourself and the people around you and try to, just keep your chin up and your head down. And that's kind of, you can see me right here trying to do both at the same time. You can't. I'm just goofing around right now. Questions, comments, any feedback, suggestions for a show topic, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapyshow, social media. You know what's coming. You're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Talk soon.